Okay, friends, I am back with a fun little peek into my process, and I am going to show you guys how I like to layer pens and paint. So, I have a giant basket of pens. These are all water-based or water-soluble pens. So, lots of cheap Crayola markers. I've got some Koi markers as well as the Tombow markers. Just a big basket filled with water-based, water-soluble pens, and I love using them to create backgrounds, use them like I would watercolors, and then use them within the layers of a lot of my art journal pages or my drawings or watercolor creations. So one of my favorite things to do is create a really colorful, messy background with those water-based markers, and I start by scribbling, just getting color all over that surface. Oftentimes I like to pick colors that aren't going to get too muddy once I water them down. I also like to place those colors kind of sporadically throughout the surface. So the cool thing about water-based markers, if you didn't know this, you can dissolve them with water. So I am just using a paintbrush and clean water and just using my brush to kind of rough up the surface a little bit and get that pigment out. What you'll also notice that I'm picking my darker colors. So those blues and purples I'm going to dissolve first so that things don't mix together and create brown or like a funky green color. Another cool little trick is having a rag on hand where you can pull pigment away and it will leave some of those little scribble marks. They'll be really light, but they're a really fun way to use those markers in a background and get some really interesting expressive marks on that surface. And I'm just going to work my way around the surface, dissolving all of those scribbles till I've got some really interesting messy color. This is actually one of my favorite ways to create colorful backgrounds without a set of watercolors. I can just toss a set of cheap Crayola pens in my purse or my backpack and be able to create with color really quickly, and definitely on a budget. And they behave a lot like watercolors. Now, once those colorful backgrounds dry, you have something that's got a lot of movement, a lot of expression, a lot of color, and these make great backgrounds for drawing and adding more and more layers. So I just really want to share with you guys how you can combine materials. You can play around with cheap pens, expensive pens, whatever your favorite pens are, and really use them within your mixed media techniques and within those layers. So oftentimes when my background's dry, I grab my favorite drawing pen, which is a Sharpie. I don't know why I love it so much, but it's what I enjoy using. Both the fine tip and the extra fine tip Sharpies are what I always have on hand. And what I really enjoy about using a permanent pen for drawing, especially when I'm working with layers, is that obviously it's permanent and it's not going to dissolve or fade if I add water to the top of it or wet media to the top of it. I've found that for me, Sharpies really withstand anything wet that you add to that surface. So while I used a lot of water soluble markers for my background, I enjoy using permanent pens for my drawing or details, that type of thing, because I know it's going to help me if I choose to start going nuts with layers and paint or adding more water or any kind of wet media to that surface. And for me, this process, when I use a permanent pen, I don't sketch things out. I don't even plan things out, you guys. This is my like Zen time where I just am brave. I let things go. If I mess up, I just keep going. I love challenging myself to create and draw and doodle or create pattern on a surface without a plan. So that is why about half the time you will see me just diving in with a permanent pen. No plan, no sketch, no idea sometimes where things are even going. It's just me working through ideas and really enjoying the journey. So by no means, if you're watching this, do you need to feel pressure to toss out your pencils and your sketches and all that good stuff. But for me, I really enjoy this process because it really forces me in a good way, in a fun way, to let go of perfection when I don't have the ability to erase or plan things out or redo things. So again, these colorful backgrounds are one of my favorite places to add drawings. Oftentimes I work in stages where I maybe only have 10 minutes and I'll do a really colorful background, and then a couple days later I'll open my sketchbook or my watercolor tablet back up, and then I will draw over the top of it, and then I will revisit that page maybe a few days later and keep going and going with layers. So what I am showing you guys guys, is actually something that you can do in stages, really easy, tangible things that you can do even in small sessions of creating. You can sit and draw and doodle, come back to it another day when you have time to add color, that kind of thing. But again, I love these messy backgrounds created with markers. They have so much interest. They're really, really different because they've got some of those scribble marks that will start showing through. But you guys know me, I like to keep going with layers and color, and I like things that pack a huge punch and have a lot of contrast and push and pull. Which means I will keep going into my drawing. So some of my areas have lighter shades of color. Some have really dark, more saturated, deeper shades. And I like to punch up some of those lighter areas. So some of those smaller little flowers, I'm just going to go back in with my markers, add some more saturated color here and there throughout my surface. My background was pretty dark to begin with, lots of blues and purples and dark reds, but I do have some lighter areas that I can just punch up. And for me and my process, my style, the way that I work, I really enjoy creating like this unique, interesting push and pull between color, between background and foreground, and really getting some things to pop, letting some things fall into the background, and really playing around with lines and contrast. And another really simple but impactful way to create that contrast is to bring in some lighter areas in those places where maybe the design is dark, where things fade to the background. So again, I like pop, so I grab my favorite pen, not sponsored, my Uniball Signo white pen, and I like to go in and just start coloring in some of those details and lines. It's kind of a long process. It takes some time. This is a fun thing to do while you're watching like Netflix or something. But the result is a lot of contrast actually really quickly with just some simple materials. Another way I like to keep adding color, keep adding contrast, and that push and pull is actually going into all my pen work with acrylic paint. And if there's anyone out there who thinks you can't combine all kinds of materials on the same surface, you're missing out. It is so much fun to play around with a variety of different tools and materials and use them within different layers, different creative sessions. So all I'm doing is just using a few colors of acrylic paint to start adding some color to my drawings. This process is actually, it feels a lot like a coloring book where I'm just going in with my brush, adding colors here and there. I am looking to create pop. I am covering up a lot of that color that I initially put down on that surface with my markers, but I'm also hanging on to some of that color in that background in that empty space above my florals. So I'm just going to work my way across the surface, adding color. You'll notice the more color you add, the more those shapes, those flowers start to pop. They look just like they've got a little bit of life in them. And since acrylic paint is pretty heavy and opaque, it's going to cover up a lot of that background that I've got going on. So when you're working with this, if you're adding color to certain things, hanging on to it in other places, if you want to cover something up, if it's too dark and it's just not working for you, acrylics are the perfect way to kind of go back in, create another layer, create a layer that has some different color to it. I'm using it to really lighten and brighten a lot of those areas that for me were just a little bit too dark and were fading into the background. Now, the cool thing about mixed media, about layering, about being open to layering, is that you can keep going and going and going and going and going until you feel like you're done. And that is exactly what you are going to be watching me do in this very last layer that I'm going to add. I'm going to use basically all of my materials. I'm going to go back in with my white pen, my markers, a little bit of paint to punch things up here and there, my black pen, just really looking to create some richer areas of color, some darker areas of color to get things to once again pop and really keep that eye moving throughout all the different elements on that surface. So I am hoping that you guys get a little bit of inspiration from this process video. This is truly a peek inside the way that I work when it comes to all kinds of tools and materials. I say play with them, layer them, mess around with unexpected combinations. I think markers and acrylic paint are two things that I don't think normally you'd put together, but for me, I love pairing them up in my process and seeing what I can come up with. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll be sharing more inspiration very soon.